Is it that most of the people who are against abortion are people you wouldn't want to fuck in the first place, huh? Boy, these conservatives are really something, aren't they? They're all in favor of the unborn. They will do anything for the unborn. But once you're born, you're on your own. Pro-life conservatives are obsessed with the fetus from conception to 9 months. After that, they don't want to know about you. They don't want to hear from you. No, nothing. No neonatal care, no daycare, no Head Start, no school lunch, no food stamps, no welfare, no nothing. If you're pre-born, you're fine. If you're preschool, you're fucked. You're fucked. Conservatives don't give a shit about you until you reach military age. Then they think you are just fine, just what they've been looking for. Conservatives want live babies so they can raise them to be dead soldiers. Pro-life. Pro-life. These people aren't pro-life, they're killing doctors. What kind of pro-life is that? What, they'll do anything they can to save a fetus, but if it grows up to be a doctor, they just might have to kill it? They're not pro-life. You know what they are? They're anti-woman. Simple as it gets. Anti-woman. They don't like them. They don't like women. They believe a woman's primary role is to function as a broodmare for the state. Pro-life. You don't see many of these white anti-abortion women volunteering to have any black fetuses transplanted into their uteruses, do you? No, you don't see them adopting a whole lot of crack babies, do you? No, that might be something Christ would do.
Now, that was an old school hip-hop song, Bahamadia, called Three the Hard Way, featuring 3 female MCs, followed by George Carlin, speaking about women's rights. A little crass, but I just couldn't help think of a better opening few minutes of this podcast by displaying not only the verbal ability of 3 amazing women, but along with biting commentary from a man. By the time you hear this podcast, I'm recording it obviously early, but it'll be last week's news. So I found it fascinating that last week, within the course of 3 days, Americans were subjected to a 3-course meal of ideals and hypocrisy. Now, of course, I'm talking about the Supreme Court decision that rendered Roe v. Wade toothless, overturning the decision, and essentially saying that states have the right to direct health care for women. Now, we shall obviously do a deep dive into the subject and how this ruling directly applies to Black America in particular. But the other 2 things that happened was the Met Gala and the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The former being a fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Of course, nobody talks about the Museum of Art, and we mostly focus on the fashion and celebrity. And the latter, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which was designed to raise scholarship money for journalist students. The irony being that not a single press clip highlights the purpose and or scholarship. What in fact has turned into a more like a political ritzy cool person's club, right, with attendees from Hollywood, music, and high-profile media figures. Both these things are invite-only, which is funny considering the altruistic reason behind both events. It's to provide access to those who can't afford to partake in regular human endeavors. Or, as the late George Carlin said, it's a big club, but you're not in it. For me, these 3 events happening in 72 hours of one another truly highlight the pervasive problem in American culture. Not only does politics, the press, and societal elite only operate in an invite-only good old boys club mentality, but all 3 events last week, weirdly enough, tried to distract you from the purpose of the very thing that's important. For the galas and the dinner, it was the coolness and the fashion over the scholarship and the fundraising. For the Supreme Court, it was who leaked the document, and not focusing on let's restrict humans' right to their own personal decisions. Listen, between the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the gala, where the media fraternize with the very people who are looking to take away your American way of life, the Met Gala, where celebrities showcase their narcissism, all the while happening on the same night that the Supreme Court privately voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, is literally a bad plot in the Hunger Games. The reality is that these events highlight the dystopian house of cards that is our American society. People know more about Pete Davidson, Kim Kardashian, and Kanye West and their fiasco than they know who's the legislative representative or who's on the Supreme Court. All this speaks to the lack of seriousness in our culture. The media not holding congressional leaders or themselves responsible for the dissolution of American character, the Supreme Court utilizing gaslighting as rationale for the destructive decision, and of course, our obsession with American celebrity culture. Just sticking with the Supreme Court's haphazard decision, though. It's a scary thing when the court's rationale for disrupting a health standard is because they lack historical precedent in the Constitution for federal protection over a private issue. Therefore, we are going to kick down the legislative branch to provide federal protection over a private issue. Huh? That doesn't make any sense. Or as an oldie but goodie for conservatives, eliminating federalism and instituting states' rights on the matter. That should give every black person a chill in their spine. Now, we are stupid to think that the state legislators who have spent the better part of the last 2 years restricting black voting rights will actually give a shit about the rights and protections of women. But this is never about protecting women, just like the removing of black voting rights isn't about protection of democracy. This is about control. Or as George Carlin said in that clip, it's about being anti-women. Think I'm lying? If this was really about protection of fetuses, why is there no law allowing medical leave in place for women covering medical expenses, including funerals for miscarriages? I mean, the fetus is a living, breathing organism, correct? So why is there no care for these same Christians surrounding death of babies due to nature's uncompromising, unfortunate, extremely traumatic circumstance? Because it's not about the fetuses. It's about control of women. Society has made a living of the power class inserting its dominance and point of view on the downtrodden and even unevenly matched. Men making decisions for women is like a vegetarian making the dinner menu for a carnivore in perpetuity. Patriarchy is a hell of a drug. Patriarchy, hypocrisy, and power operate as the pillars of the great American system. These things, no matter what, whether we're talking about entertainment, politics, or just people, operate in a three-way hard system for people to adapt. But it's all good as long as we can pay attention to the beautiful gowns and the beautiful galas and the beautiful dinners. Those are three things that are maybe easy to digest and not so hard to process. Welcome to Uncultured Bias podcast. My name is Camara Williams. I am your host. That was an extended opening. On our show, we say that culture is a matter of perspective and opinion. After all, culture is another way to say discovered. We are uncultured, we are biased, and we are black. If you're tuning for the first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're not tuning for the first time, thank you for returning. Obviously, we ask those who are listening to the podcast to, if you're listening on Apple, to rate the podcast with a 5-star rating and leave a commentary. It's a way for the Apple to judge algorithms and obviously engagement. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors this week, Coleman Law. You can reach them at 850-597-2990. They operate in business and tax. If you're in the market for real estate, please contact Keystone Global Real Estate at 407-680-8510 or KeystoneGlobalRealEstate.com. And if you're in the market for probates, guardianships, wills, trusts, and all that fun stuff, contact my firm, Smith & Williams Trial Group, 888-798-4529 or 888-SWTG-LAW. Of course, info at SWTG-LAW or cwilliams at SWTG-LAW. Now, last week, I talked about patriarchy. I just talked about patriarchy. And actually, speaking of which, I actually participated in patriarchy because I was myself asked to comment on Roe v. Wade decision. And upon me showing up at the studio, I noticed no women were there to comment. And so therefore, I wanted to highlight the hypocrisy of me being a man commenting on another man's decision to prohibit women's rights. I recognize the patriarchal privilege of my position, and therefore I said, you know what? I'm going to do a podcast, and I'm going to have women speak on these women's issues. And I couldn't think of a better time than to invite my people, three dynamic women, three the hard way. They're going to spit some discourse about social or information. And I'm going to start off with Rebecca. Are you with me?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Desir, founder of Black Health Commission. It really is an honor to be here with you, Camara. I have over 10 years of experience in public health field. And it's really an honor to be part of this conversation with Jasmine as well as Representative Rayner.
Right. And you are the executive director of the Black Health Commission.
Correct.
Yes. And so you're going to help us talk through some what are the subjects or misconceptions surrounding, maybe Black health or this entire ruling, hopefully. Yeah. All right. I'm going to go next to Jasmine Burney-Clark, my friend. How you doing, Jazz?
I'm well. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. All right. Now, Jasmine,
Good.
you are. I don't steal your thunder. You can go ahead and introduce yourself because you've been on MSNBC and all that
Certainly.
other stuff.
I'm Jasmine Burney-Clark, founder and consulting director of Equal Ground. We are a Black-led, community-centered organization that works to prioritize the voting rights of Black Floridians across the state of Florida. We know that voting isn't alone going to save us, but we do understand that it is a pathway and an avenue to what we believe could be victory if we utilize that as a tool in our toolbox. So thank you so much for having me today.
No, I appreciate you. And now we got a special guest, superstar, trying to get her on, Rep Michele Rayner, my friend, my petty friend, my text message petty friend, Rep Rayner.
Oh, whatever, man. You first off, you know where to find me. And we were supposed to do this podcast a long time ago.
Yeah.
But we're here now. Hi, everyone. My name is Michele Rayner. I am, in fact, a state representative here in Florida. I am running for Congress as well. I feel like the earth is a little ghetto sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all know that viral TikTok song. Well, anyway, and then so I'm here because I know we got some folks on here who can't be partisan. I'm here to be partisan. So I will provide your entertainment, much to the chagrin of my political team. Thanks for having me, Camara. I feel honored that you invited little old me.
No, first of all, it's interesting because Jazz and Rep Rayner, I have a weird tie-in on this for this podcast because Jazz is actually the first guest I had on this podcast. And she had to replace you because last year you were dealing with obviously the grief of your father, still grieving, obviously, and so Jazz jumped in and provided the assist, and so it's cool to have you guys back on, and everything everything ties back into one another. So I appreciate you, all three of you guys, to jump on this pod. Actually, I want to start with, not leaning into the political. I want to start actually with Rebecca and just talk about not only your reaction to the ruling, and we'll get into like the policy and voting and all that, but I want to get not only your reaction to the ruling, and then what did you take from that, given your experience and your position?
My initial reaction, I was just a little bothered by it, knowing and understanding that abortion should not be something that is controlled by politicians. This is something that should be a right to anyone who is capable of bearing children, that they can make the choice to have that child or not, despite whatever the reason is. I think there's a lot of controversy when you talk about abortion. There's a lot of stigma there. So this is now kind of bringing all communities together to kind of talk about this. So from my perspective, it's really the fact that abortion is healthcare. It's something that everyone should have equal access to and be able to choose to get abortion if they feel like that's what's best for them. That's my stance on it.
Yeah. So, just keeping with that, I know you said abortion is healthcare. I kind of have this thought process. It is healthcare, but it's also, and now it's Rep Rayner's pet joining the pod. But I also think it's like really like human care as far as societal and economics, right? Because a lot of times people make these decisions not because they're like, as they've been portrayed as these evil, vindictive people that want to get rid of human life, but these are hard decisions for women, and they come into health decisions, and they come into financial decisions, or just societal. Like, I'm not ready. Like, I'm just not ready to have a child, and I don't want to bring a child into a world where I'm not ready to have one to properly care for.
Exactly. It's really a personal decision. It really doesn't matter what the decision, why they choose to make that decision. But right. When we're coming from a public health perspective, I mean, there are those different factors that impact someone's health and the weathering on our bodies just by the discrimination, microaggressions, all of these things already impacting our bodies as Black individuals in America. So when you talk about, access to healthcare, access to abortion, whatever it is, I think that just adds another layer to it and adds another barrier to a group of individuals that already are facing health disparities.
Yeah. There is definitely a different in the Black community between access to healthcare, access to multitude of services that, people always think like Planned Parenthood is just about abortion, and it's like not. It's like about women's care. It's like there's a lot that they do, and there's other organizations, just not Planned Parenthood, but they offer a multitude of women's services that far exceed just abortion, right? And when you're attacking these things, you're really just attacking the healthcare of women. And if you see, Planned Parenthood is often within the Black neighborhood. I know these abortion advocates or anti-abortion advocates, they're all in the Black community. But it's like, well, because it's access to services that a lot of times people in that community don't really don't have the ability to go through. So, yeah. So, Jazz, I wanted to get your opinion on just the decision from the Supreme Court, and you color it with the idea of how did we even get here, as far as the build up to all this, as far as on the, I guess the judicial activism or the voting activism, anyway, just tell me your thoughts.
So I thought that my initial reaction was that this is horrifying,
right?
To learn that this is the decision of the court and that they are getting ready to set back 50 years of what is determined to be settled law, turning the hands of time back and doing it because of the shift in direction in the makeup of the court.
Yeah.
And the way that they are choosing to interpret the Constitution. So for 50 years, we have had a justice system, a Supreme Court justice who have had the hands turned, who have seen the lever, if you will, go back and forth when it comes to who's in power. And we have not seen this. We've seen threats towards Roe v. Wade, but we have never seen a step like this be taken. We have seen, however, states choose to make their own decisions about abortion as it relates to what they have within their purview to limit access as much as possible under the guise of Roe v. Wade, but still allowing women to have access, but at the very minimal or least amount of time that they are willing to give to women in states. And so, again, my initial reaction was that it was a horrifying one, and very worried, very scared, not just for women who are choosing to have an abortion, but also for folks who utilize services at Planned Parenthood that are not just women, but trans and non-binary folks who get support from facilities like that. And so it is important that these facilities obviously be viewed as healthcare, not just as abortion clinics that they have been sort of told or viewed for us in the past. They have evolved with the services.
Right.
The other thing that I would say about how we got to this point again is that we have been teetering on the line. There have been threats to this issue for so long. It goes back to your initial comments about control and control over women. Women have always been the subject of a judicial system and or state governments that take away our power and ability to make choices for ourselves. So this is not new. This is not new for any woman who is experiencing any effects from this right now. But what I think is new is the type of leaders who are now being led to draw these laws or create these laws and author them in a way that just feels much more malicious than it has in the past. There is a new crop of men who are operating in a way that is harmful and is dangerous to our communities. And they not only have control over our bodies, but they've got control over our children, men in our state. They've got control over every aspect of our life, not just over women's bodies. Women's bodies just seem to be the hot topic of this moment. Right. But there is more to come from these people. And so we should be aware that it isn't just this issue. It is just the latest issue that we are grappling with.
Yo, I kind of want to, I want to get into that in a moment, because I do want to talk about this thing where it seems like society has really, especially surrounding men, and just really this idea of controlling, right? You said something very poignant. It's just women are right now it's a subject, but it's not. There's not a rooted issue. The rooted issue is like really control. Like they want to control education. They want control. They want to control how you speak in society. What can you say? If you're a private corporation, they want to control. Obviously what you learn, and you want to control your religion, right? And control how you vote, and obviously they want to control women's bodies. So like there's something deep seated that I really want to touch into that in a second. But before we get into that, I want to ask Rep. Rayner, just on the politics side of it, if you want to talk about what I just mentioned, or you want to just lean into like just the politics side of it, like what did you glean from what happened last week?
Yeah, so I will tell you, I don't think that we can separate politics from the point that I think Jasmine just made. When we were dealing with our own abortion ban bill in the state of Florida during legislative session, one of the very things that I talked about is the history of Black women's bodies being chained to this country for commodification. There has never been a time in American history where Black women have been able to have self-determination about their own body, whether it's been through slavery, whether it's been through Jim Crow, whether it's been through economic challenges, whether it's been through the court system with dependency, whether motherhood has been criminalized. There's never really been a time that I know of, and if someone else knows of one, obviously we have someone that is in Black health here, so I know that they are the expert, but I think that most of us would agree that at every turn since the inception of this country, Black women's bodies have not been their own to make decisions. And so while we're looking at the holistic idea of women, we all know on this podcast that it's going to be Black and brown women and poor women who are going to be the most harmed, because at the end of the day, and I've said this publicly, I've said it at the Capitol, I've said it, on other, platforms, these white men, these white Republican men, they're going to make sure that their wives and their mistresses and their daughters will have abortions. Absolutely. They'll make sure, and they're doing it now. They'll make sure that can happen. Mm-hmm. So once again, it is a way for them to, as Jasmine indicated, control people, and it's all political, because really it comes down to, I believe, a lot of several things. But one, the othering that they have been doing, the fear mongering, and they're scared of the browning of America. And I think that the only way they feel that they can keep their, majority or supremacy is to essentially control. So all of this, while we understand the psychological and the social historical aspect, it is intersected with the political mindset and the political avenue that we're in this moment.
Yeah, it's fascinating as you were talking, and I was thinking about what both Jasmine and Rebecca were saying. I really thought about this thing of economic class. It's really a class issue, right? Because you said it so eloquently that these men are not going to have to worry about getting abortions, because they're going to find a way, right? And they're going to hop on the planes and go to a state or go to another country if they have to and get it done, because they're not going to allow it to like fuck up their life, right? And so it's going to be something to where it's all a class issue, and it's all economics. And I always think about I always look at every instinct of how people operate, especially in society and politics. Like, hey, I feel like race, I always try to evaluate through the prism of race and class. And then there are times when they intersect, a lot of times they intersect, and just right now. But I really do feel like that's the thing that people are not talking about, is how the economics behind this decision and what they're trying to imply. and how they're trying to subjugate. We talked about with voting, and we'll get into that in a moment. But just really subjugating people to a certain class sector through this decision and economics, and saying, listen, we're going to let the states deal with it. And we obviously know Black people with our history dealing with states' rights and how that affects, us. We're like, oh, that can't be good, especially if you live in the South. That can't be good, right? And so really just fascinating on the subject of class and economics. I mean, Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on that, or anybody really? But I don't know if anybody wants to jump in or chime in.
I can jump in here and say that the reason why we are probably not hearing conversations about race and class is because this movement is centered around white women. No matter what side of the political aisle you sit on, white women are the face. White women have been nurtured and cared for and will continue to be, and they have been well resourced to quickly activate themselves around this issue and to mobilize and to have conversations that center them and that center their priorities. I know Rebecca is a great example of what it's like to be tokenized in this moment. When the news story broke, she was pulled in 100 different directions because they knew that women of color needed to be a priority and needed to be centered, but they didn't have any of those women because they had not been talking to those women. They had not been cultivating relationships. We've been dealing with abortion bans since January here in the state of Florida, and they have not been prioritizing Black women in those movements and in those conversations. And so you find your one in each of your cities, and we use that story and recycle it over and over again. Wow. But we aren't talking to poor women poor Black and brown women who are in communities who are being affected by this. And it may not be not because they don't want to tell their story. No one's asking them about their story. Right. No one is, having conversations with them about this, or no one is sitting down and listening and seeking out individuals you don't even have to tell your story. I think folks just need to see and know that you are prioritized and need to be centered in this conversation, because every state in the South is not going to have an abortion option, like every state in the South, which means going to the North, East, or the Midwest is just going to make it impossible to access these services moving forward.
Right. I've actually I'm sorry. No, yeah. I'm going to, Rebecca, I want you to jump in. Just want to say this. I've actually been in communities where kids or adults be like, I've never left the state of Florida. Because they're like, I've never left the state of Florida. And you be like, wait, what? Because, you realize your privilege. You be like, oh, snap.
Not just Florida. Yeah. Your neighborhood.
The neighborhood, the city. Yeah. I have kids that said, I've never been to the beach. I live on the west coast of Florida.
Right. Yeah. And so, people often forget that people are segmented based on their finances and exposure, right. So Rebecca, go ahead and I see you want to chime in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Jasmine. Thank you so much for highlighting the tokenism when it comes to this space, as well as other topics that can be controversial. With over 50% of the Black population living in the South states, I think this is just going to be an issue moving forward, not just for, health, but even the economic, the race, the classism, all of that plays a part. And a lot of times, I have to check my privilege because we all have it. We all have to understand that we come into these spaces with a privilege, whether it is our social status or the positions that we hold. And I think that's how it's just easy to point a Rebecca out and say that, oh, you can speak on this matter. But I think sometimes it's important to, when we are, having these discussions and activating some community engagements to make sure that we are including the communities in these conversations and hearing what they are saying, which are the barriers, because sometimes we may be a little far removed from those situations and not really understanding what the current situation is. Because I know for me particularly, I'm more of a data person. I read a lot of research, so it takes us to be intentional to hear what our community members are saying and how can we, be an ally and help them with this, with not only with the abortion rights, but even any other topic.
I want Rep. Rayner to jump in here just real quick. I just want to say that I can imagine it's hard, especially for both Jasmine and you, Rebecca. Like, you guys operate on a state level to where you're in rooms and committee meetings, and it's like you probably look around and you're like, damn, like where are we? And you often have to be the voice or the representative, and I know what it's like. Because I've been in those rooms I'm not comparing myself, but I'm saying, like, when you're like, you look around, you're like, there ain't nobody here that looks like me. Oh, so now I have to like speak up on the behalf of Black people, because clearly nobody else is going to speak up on behalf of Black people here. So I can know just on the twofold for being a Black woman and me being a woman and a Black person, can be a little hard sometimes to be in that space. Am I projecting, or am I right about that?
You're correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, even though it wasn't towards me, but yeah. I have been in those moments as well.
Yeah.
So
go, Rep. I want you to. I call you Rep.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold up. I say Rep on this pod, and I really want to say Michele.
You can. That's fine. That's my name.
Yeah.
What my mom and my daddy named.
All right. I'm just gonna say Michele because I don't.
Liz, it's fine. But +1 to what Jasmine said, +1 to what Rebecca said. And I think, like, if you see me when I talk anything, so I sit on Health and Human Services in the Florida House. I sit on Professions in Public Health, so I saw the abortion ban twice. And so when I sit on those are two of the committees I sit on, but specifically when we're talking about health equity and when we're talking about health and access to care, I always center Black women because that has never been centered in these conversations. I always start with, when I did my debate on the abortion ban, I was like, I'm going to center this in reproductive justice. And I talked about the history of reproductive justice, how it was coined, and it's by Black women, and it's been a movement by Black women. So for me, it is, to Jasmine's point, like, I was catching the Holy Ghost because even, the other day when I organized a rapid response rally, like, I can count on my hands how many Black women were out there, but it was a bunch of white women and they were activated. And so when I'm thinking about how do we discuss and how do we talk about abortion, I'm always wanting to loop in folks like Rebecca and other people who are in this space, because Black folks have abortions too, but you also know because of Jesus and all those other things, we don't want to talk about it and we can't talk about it. And Rebecca, I saw you jump in. Hold on. Go ahead, Rebecca.
No, I mean, as soon as I pointed my hand up, you said exactly what I was going to say, because I think there's a stigma behind abortion, and within our community, religion is pretty much the focal point in a lot of our homes, and so even being as open to talk about abortion rights, I'm a pastor's kid, so when my dad hears that I'm talking about this openly, and he's just like, "What? You better not say anything," and I'm just like, Dad, this is where I'm at in life. This is what I believe in. I feel like everyone should have the choice regardless of their religious view. And again, I think that's a constant conversation in our community, is how do we but how do we present this information in a way that our folks can digest it and be open to talk about it openly? I think it's just amazing that we as 4 Black individuals are openly talking about this. So I hope this will continue the conversation and people will feel more comfortable. I think, again, to your point, it's that stigma.
100%. We at our rally, my sorority sister, shout out to Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Oops, sorry, Jess. She spoke, and she's a Black woman that's an abortion provider, and I didn't realize that she was an abortion provider. And so my eyes were wide, because I'm 40 years old. I have never met a Black abortion provider in the South. And I'm like blowed. I literally the whole time was like, I didn't even know this. I knew you were a doctor. I didn't know what you did.
Wow.
And, and I remember growing up, my mom is a social worker, also my soror. My mom is a social worker and was, she would have conversations in the church of like, we need to make sure that we're supplying condoms and we need to make sure that we're talking to kids about sex. Oh, you can't talk about that because you're not supposed to have sex. And mom was like, yeah, I get it, but people are having sex. So we have to have those conversations. But to your point, we would like try to put Jesus on so much of it, but not also live in the real world of what's happening.
It's weird. I'm sorry. Go, Jazz. Go ahead. Yeah.
I can just add to that a little bit because Rebecca is a pastor's child and I'm a pastor's wife.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't actually know that. And so, when the abortion ban conversation started up this year, I was like, oh, do I want to tip my toe in it? Do I not? Should I be? And I'm like, no, I have to amplify messages and stories and spread information that our community needs to have access to, because I know a lot of folks follow me in different spaces and are probably looking for my, words of advice or commentary on a lot of different things. So I chose to not sit silent and not say anything about this issue because I don't have a choice not to. It is paramount to be able to do that. We work with a network of pastors, and one of the pastors said this week in a conversation after it wasn't a space where we were prioritizing abortion issues. It just so happened that the meeting took place right after the announcement. And we posted this on our social today, but it said, if God gives us the choice of salvation, then a woman should have the right to choose. And that was so important, I think, for us, because that leaves everybody out of the decision. It's you and God at this point. Everybody else should have nothing else to say. Politicians, pastors, or anybody else connected to it. It's between you and God. That's it. That is your decision to make. And I just said, that's it. That's how we talk about it. But the other way we also talk about it in our community is the cost of childcare, the cost of diapers, the cost of formula. Like, there's an expense, no matter how you look at it, an expense of a person, or there are tangible things that are needed to ensure that a child survives on this planet. And how are we showing up, whether they choose, whatever the choice is that they decide to make? How is the community, how is the church showing up if we are so if we are so deeply affected by a woman's choice to have an abortion? Are we also so deeply affected and impacted by how that child survives in our community as well?
So that's first of all, that was amazing. If we were in a club and poetry, with like snapping the fingers and all that, right? Yeah. So, but I have this philosophical question, and Jazz, Rebecca, Michele, you guys can jump in on here, but how do we reconcile Black faith with, Black reality? And so, like, that is it's like really weird sometimes, because especially when the Black church, you know the history, and you guys know the history of Black church because two of you are, interpersonally connected to it. But obviously the Black church has had such an indelible effect on activism within politics, right? But then as politics has grown and has evolved, it's like sometimes I wonder, has the Black church like failed to evolve, or it has de-evolved, right? Because these issues that are affecting Black people, and not we're just talking about abortion, but just talking about how do we communicate messaging? How do we communicate activism? Like, how do we engage? And, and I definitely want to talk about engagement of Black voters, in the second part of the pod, but like, how do we reconcile these things of Black realism and Black faith? Rebecca, I know you're holding your.
Can I? So my grandfather was a bishop.
Okay.
My mother was a church mother. I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, have my evangelism license from the Church of God in Christ. They probably have snatched it. Yeah. I am a Black queer woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember the one thing my mother would always say, you've got to know Jesus for yourself.
Right.
And so for me, you've got to know God for yourself.
Right.
And so there is a God of my childhood that I don't necessarily ascribe to, because I was taught that guy, like my father was like, we couldn't play marbles because the Bible says marvel not. And it says marvel, not marble. But Black people, I love us. But so you've got to know the book for yourself. And for me, my book is the Bible, it's Christianity. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I've had to make peace with that. And I think that you see folks of our generation and younger, making peace with it. I mean, it's because here's the reality. It's like when Samuel Alito was like, yes, everything should be like the Constitution of 1775 or whatever. Like, that's not reality. Like, we live in 2022. Right. There are things that the Bible does not speak about that we are experiencing right in this moment. Right. So how do you use faith as a way of understanding, as a way of getting wisdom, as a way of being able to make decisions? And I think that goes with the argument of it taking it literally versus actually the practical application to your life. So for me, as how I show up as a woman of faith, as someone that can preach down and pray down, Jasmine was on a call when I prayed. She was like, ma'am, and we'll speak in tongues in a minute. I know that I know God for myself. And so I think that, but in the church, we have to, and some churches are, but we have to start having these difficult conversations. And someone just sent me a video of E. Dewey Smith when he was like, listen, y'all don't want gays in the church, then stop singing songs that on Sunday that gay people have written, that you won't have any songs to minister to. And he said the same. You've got to know Jesus. You've got to know God for yourself. So that's how I think if we start having these kind of conversations, like really, then that to me, how you deal with Black faith and Black reality. I will also let the pastor's child and wife jump in on that.
Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I love what you said, Michele. I think that kind of hits home for me as well. My mom would always tell me, as you go out in the world, make sure that you build your own relationship with God, whatever that looks like. And, you are an adult now. So what I've seen, especially in our generation, a lot of people have strayed away from religion and now focusing more on spiritualism and seeing how that kind of plays a part. And that kind of makes it different. Like, I feel like our culture is shifting a little bit from the church, like not as much as before. I agree. Where everyone was going to church. I mean, most of the time most people are going to brunch on Sunday and not really, the church. So I think there is a culture shift that's happening. But to your point, I think it's having those leaders, those champions in the inside, like a Jasmine, who is open and is leading by example. Like, you're the epitome of what it looks like to be a woman of faith, being a first lady, and also doing the work in the community on topics that most people don't want to talk about. So I think being that champion in those spaces and identifying others who can be champions in the churches that can kind of facilitate that conversation. I think that's a sure way to start that conversation. And I feel like within the Black community, politics is typically something that is not openly discussed either, and not realizing that how politics it really impacts so many different levels of our lives. And we really have to kind of dive a little bit deeper and educate folks where they are to help them understand how politics and how these conversations can really impact their lives and have a domino effect. So it's not just one issue we're talking about. We already just talked about how economics is now involved in this conversation and all these other things. But I think that's something that we who kind of understand that piece, how we can kind of bring that in the conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. I also believe that a reckoning is when we decide not to allow the church to have or own this conversation. That is also an institution ran by men. So we can't just talk about white men running their governmental institutions. We have to talk about the Black men who are running the church, which is another institution where in some cases women are not even allowed to step foot in a pulpit. And so if that is the case, you can't also tell me what to do with my body either. And so if we're going to fight like hell against a governmental agency, we also need to ensure that the men who are leading us and our souls to Christ understand and know that they should be protecting, not fighting us on an issue like this. I said it already before, prepare yourselves for either a living mechanism or non, but I don't think we leave it into their hands to decide how we have this conversation. We tell them how this conversation is actually going to happen and how they should be centering us in this conversation as well. Again, because we can't just be focused on one institution and not the other.
Yeah.
So that is all I'll say, and echoing the same things that have already been said.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think most people would understand, or they would agree rather, that faith is a private walk, and it's fascinating that we acknowledge that faith is a private walk, and yet we use it to bludgeon people publicly into, private decisions. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird. Like, we, on the one, talking out of both sides of our mouth, and like, for those who represent the Christian orthodoxy, it's like, you can't serve two masters, right? So if you understand that faith is a private conversation, a private walk, a private vehicle, to you and your creator, then how can you take that vehicle and try to run somebody over, into your way of your dogma of thinking? And it's odd that, nobody challenges that, or not enough people challenge that enough. And Jasmine, you said something really fascinating, and I'm probably going to, as the sole Black male on this podcast, but I'm willing to take the arrows. Let's talk about Black men and how they adhere to white patriarchy in society, in the subjugation of Black women, in this discussion, right? It's a reality that we don't talk about, but, Black men, and it's growing by the day. Jasmine, you see the numbers every political cycle. Black men are getting picked off like, I don't like weeds in the field by Republican, ideology and adhering to patriarchy and, all the other, prohibiting things of growth. So, I mean, Jasmine, you want to speak on it? Or maybe Michele? I don't know, whoever want to jump on it. If you want to attack me, you attack me. I'm just, it's whatever.
Yeah, it is tricky. They are also a subset of individuals who have not been centered either. They have not been nurtured properly, but they are resonating, they're resonating with messages from a conservative lens, if you will, of policies that are harmful to us. And it is hard to witness, but how do we reckon with it when there isn't an alternative we can also present to them? The other thing I will say is specifically about Black men as it relates to the issue of abortion is that they also benefit from this, the system as well. When, you make decisions, there is a known solution to that decision, whether it is an abortion, Plan B, or any other sort of family planning options that are out there. I do believe that this is an issue that we will start to see Black men lean a bit more into when they do see how it impacts them when this option is also ripped away, because it is not only an option for women, it is an option for them as well. Yeah. And although it may in some cases be deemed as is one that is a choice that they are making on behalf of other women. And I know we're getting into some territory here, but I do think that this is one that will awaken them around how they view their politics as we go into this upcoming cycle.
So so let's walk in. So we're going. Oh, I'm sorry, Michele. Go ahead, say it. What do you want to say?
Can I be like, how transparent can I be? Like, how real? Can I be?
You can be like we're on our text messages and we're being super ugly.
Okay. I won't be super ugly. So I will say this. White supremacy is a disease that affects us all.
I was getting ready. I knew you were going to go here. I literally knew you were going to go here. But please go ahead. Continue.
We've had this conversation.
Yeah.
We all have to divest ourselves from white supremacy every day. Mm-hmm. And Black men, sometimes, not all, and I love Black men. I have a Black father, a Black brother, a Black nephew, a Black father-in-law. Sometimes Black men will aspire to be white men because of the disease of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And they will do things and act in ways that will put them in closer proximity to whiteness, thinking that whiteness is safety and that they've made it and that they won't be harmed or whatever, because that's the psychology that we've all grown up with. And that's why we always, every day, have to divest from it. And because we know there's a proximity to whiteness and white supremacy that does not keep us safe. Yeah. We know that. But that's the psychology that we have. So when we think about Black men in this conversation and where they come up and how they look when it comes to speaking about women and women's bodies and why they are so easily picked off by, Republican ideology. And I had a friend talk about this. I feel like, Camara, we've talked about this, but I had a friend who works with athletes. He's a lawyer for Joe Briggs. He's a lawyer for the NFL Players Union. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how sometimes, especially with these younger Black men that play football, maybe not have a strong father figure, their white coaches, their father figure. So their white coaches like Jesus and a wife and become a Republican. And that's how you be safe. And that's how you are, respected, and that's how you will be set up. So I think that we have to have a conversation about what divestment for Black folks looks like from white supremacy, because we have a lot of Black people, men and women, non-binary folks, trans folks, that want to be white people. Well, period.
Yeah. Listen, I'll just say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm done. I said what I needed to say. Yeah. Laura, I know my team is probably like, you're running for Congress. What are you doing?
No, because the reality is, and we have spoken about this, and I'll lay it out flat. There's a show, Dave Chappelle show, and he had a sketch with Rick James, and Rick James, it was like cocaine's a hell of a drug. And so I always say that white supremacy, cocaine are one and the same, because it's very addictive and it's very destructive. And, for Black men, we, in danger of, because we're surrounded by it, we inject it into our systems, and it's addicting it's easy to fall back into wanting to appease or, feed that hunger of, wanting to be a part of the system or be white adjacent. And power is part of white supremacy. And Black men, because we often have been subjugated to, being less than or commoditized or even like sexualized in our Black bodies, and our lack of intuitiveness and whatnot, that when we get this taste of white supremacy, of white power, we want to, enrapture ourselves within it, and it becomes addicting to where we recognize and be like, oh, I want some more of that. And then we don't understand that it's destructive to the body. And by the body, I mean the Black community. And, and so, I'm sorry to talk so theoretically in this, but, I tend to look at things in this, theoretical lens always. And that's the way I see, white supremacy, and especially with Black men. And the problem I see now is that it's infected us so much that it's going to be a power play in 2022 elections, and going on beyond, especially in this state. Jasmine, I don't know if you want to talk about it as far as just like engagement. And I know you talked a little bit about Black men and messaging, but
no, I actually don't. I want to get back to the fact that we are not prioritizing women in the conversation anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We shifted.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
But I think that you need to do a part 2 where we do segment this conversation out as an extension of what we are experiencing on a national level when it comes to white supremacy, conservative white men, and the institutions that are attracting them more and more to how they are impacting us as a result.
Fair enough. So, all right, let's keeping with this centering women on the conversation. And I it's weird because I need someone to center Black women, but you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation about white women, and they are being centered within the conversation of this particular new political controversy or whatnot. And going to the rallies, and you see nothing but a sea of white women with the pink hats and rallying. And I say all that to say, I was fascinated on Twitter because I saw this thing where, and to see if you can follow my train of thought, I saw this thing where like, oh no, women are gonna be so engaged. We're gonna be, we're taking over we're gonna take over 2022 and all this other stuff. And I was like, that's interesting. For 2 reasons. Number one, Black women voted the highest numbers of any demographic. And then it was white women in both elections that, voted for patriarchy over person. And so what is this number that is going to be, shown in 2022? Like, Black women, there's not much more they can do to deliver this country, past itself. Like, I don't understand. Like, it's like squeezing juice from a turnip at this point. Like, I don't know what they're expecting, and how they're expecting to really, push this conversation forward or engagement. I don't know. Or maybe I'm being ignorant, but I don't understand like where this engagement is going to come from, unless it's going to come from white women owning their own shit. Because Black women have already taken on the water and the burden of this democracy. Am I tripping here, or do you guys follow my train of thought? Anybody? Bueller? I'm sorry. Everybody's on mute.
I'm gonna pivot to Jazz or Rebecca, and then I will hop in and add my thoughts.
Okay. So I would say that your train of thought is not incorrect. I said that white women have been nurtured and cared for. They have been led to the water. Hands have been held through this process. And I don't know when or where or how that shift sort of took place, where it did become predominantly a white woman's issue. And it never, I think, crossed over into the community where women of color were prioritized or centered. I just don't know where they have done sort of a disservice on that particular issue. But I will say that it is hard to witness, hard to watch. It also boils down to, I think for me, when we have so many issues that we are at the center of, and there are not white women who are standing in alignment with us and or are holding our hands and nurturing and being supportive and amplifying, it just makes it difficult to lock arms on this issue, despite how important it is. So we think, in my opinion, they should be leading, putting your bodies on the line, and we will show up the way that we think we know how and what is best to be able to do that. But I think white women need to realize that there are more issues than just abortion that we should be tackling right now. All of the issues are interconnected and intersect. And it would be great for them to realize and recognize that in this fight that we're in, because again, it is abortion today, but it could be gay marriage tomorrow. It could be, well, it's already loss of representation for Black communities in the South through a redistricting process that I'm going to keep talking about. And you look around and couldn't find nobody. So that is what I would say as it relates to the commentary you just provided.
Okay. I want to get into that redistricting in a moment and how it ties into all of this. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts about what is brought up?
Yeah, I kind of just want to add to what Jasmine said. And, when the laws were passed in Texas and then later on in Florida and, all these other like-minded laws have been brought up to the legislative sessions. On Twitter and Instagram, there were all these types of memes of white women comparing it to that novel, The Handmaid's Tale. So I don't know if you all are familiar with that on Hulu, but, to me, that was just such a it was such an obvious moment as to how there is a disconnect between the movements of white feminism and womanism, which is what Alice Walker coined. It's just, again, to Jasmine's point, is realizing that this is not something that we can be always in the forefront of talking about it and amplifying our community's voices, but if you are a true ally in this space, is even when we're not in the room, bringing up the issues that impact our communities, because I feel like as Black women, we stand in other pockets and speak to other, in other communities or other issues that don't directly impact us per se, but just being the type of people that we're in these rooms just trying to address it. So again, going back to how white feminism kind of plays a part into this and comparing it to the Handmaid's Tale, I think that's pretty shocking that they tend to do that, especially even now, like you kind of see that reoccurring meme coming around. So again, that disconnect.
Well, that, and I'll let you jump in a second, Michele. I just want to play into that a little bit. It really shows how media and culture and pop culture intersect in how people see the world, right? Because The Handmaid's Tale is how people want to process what's happening in the world, but it's very much, as you said, to your point, white-centered. And it shows what happens when you don't have Black stories, in the popular, conversation, right? Like, what do those Black stories look like? I mean, I'm not saying there's not some interchangeability Black stories and The Handmaid's Tale, and I've seen bits and pieces of the show, so I'm not even an expert, but I understand the imagery that you're associating with it. But I often think that's why it's important to have more Black stories in popular culture to really show, to have people pull from it. And I know it doesn't seem interrelated, but it's related. Like, it's the reason why a lot of white folks voted for Barack Obama is because they can, in a weird way, they attributed his being to Black respectability of the Cosby Show, right? Like, you saw, like, the way people kind of see imagery and align themselves, weirdly enough, to relating to something is through pop culture lens. And this is why we have to be important to push Black stories in pop culture, because in a sick way, that's how they can interrelate with that. That's why they always go through music, because that's why they feel like can relate to us. But like, that's just one spectrum of the Black storyline. One scintilla of the Black storyline is through a particular sector of music, talking about hip hop, right? Because there's scores of different ways of Black expression in the music form. And so I'm sorry going a little diatribe there, but I don't know. I'm sorry, Rebecca, I didn't mean to step on your statement or anything like that.
No. You added to it, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Rep, what you got?
I mean, I think that not just highlighting Black stories, but I think that especially around this particular issue, you have to have Black women leaders, right? Black women electeds. That we say representation matters, and it's not just like this cute cliche thing, but it really does matter when you're in tables and rooms that other folks may not have the opportunity to be in. And so for me, that's why in any debate, I always intersect and amplify Black women and what we, in our stories, even when we're talking about, trans women, I talked about Black trans women. When we're talking about abortion, how it affects Black women, when we're talking about food deserts, when we're talking about education, because our stories are often left as afterthoughts unless it's some white pro-lifer that wants to talk about, let's save the Black babies, but then don't want to do anything for them when these Black children are born.
Right.
So for me, I think that not only do we have the stories, but we have to have Black leaders in all of these spaces, whether it's in the health space, whether it's in the C3, C4 space and political advocacy, whether it's in elected office, whether it's in, policy work. You have to have Black voices, specifically Black women. And I'm telling you, for me, like, I am tired. Like, I don't know about the rest of y'all. I am tired because I feel like we are always charged with saving the world. And to Jasmine's point earlier, when are y'all gonna come stand with us? When are y'all gonna come lock arms with us? When are y'all gonna, kick and scream and sit in when our people are dying, when Black representation is being cut in half, when, you can't even teach our history in school? Like, when are you going to care as much about us as we care about y'all? And Joan Morgan, she wrote of this book, When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, and it's like one of it's like the young Black feminist, womanist, manifesto. And shout out to Joan Morgan. And she often talks about how Black women will always go up and stand up for everybody, but when it's time for folks to stand up for us, it's crickets. And to me, when we're thinking about Roe v. Wade and we're thinking about abortion rights, I will say this to my last breath, and I mean it, the most harmed people by a restriction on reproductive health, period, are Black women. No one else will be more harmed. And so I don't want to hear a conversation that's not centered about Black women especially with regard to this issue.
No, facts. And to that point, and Rebecca, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with Black women dying in the hospital bed delivering babies at a high propensity, because Black women in healthcare, they're often ignored with their requests, with their inquiries. And often it goes into the subject of like the strong Black woman and, you can handle it and whatnot. And the nurse practitioners, nurse assistants, doctors don't adhere to Black women's pain. And then it transfers over into how when delivering these babies, and delivery is already a life-threatening process. I know we've through modern technology, we've made it a smoother process, but it's a physically, emotionally draining process. I've seen my wife go through it twice. And it's very scary. It can be very scary. It's very tenuous, especially for both the child and the woman. And so, I can only imagine, not having the privilege of me having my resources and Black women having to go in there, by themselves without resources, without representation, and then without a voice speaking to their pain. I mean, Rebecca, am I off shoot here, or what do you?
No, you're not. But I do want to add that socioeconomic status does not change treatment for a lot of Black women, even if they go to the hospital with all the resources. We have stories from Serena Williams and her how her experience was. And we know she has a bag, like she is one of the most famous people in the world. And she shared her story and how that was traumatizing to her, where they were not listening to her pain or how she was feeling with her body. Beyonce came out and said she had the same thing. So again, when we're talking about, Black maternal health, it's not a socioeconomic thing. It's that implicit bias that's there. It's the system that has been designed against us. That's what we're fighting against when we're going in that delivery room. So again, I just wanted to add to that. It's not, we can have all the resources and the money, but a lot of times it's things that are beyond our control.
Fair enough. My bad. No doubt.
No.
And that's why I don't mind being corrected on things, even on my own podcast. Right. So, I want to shift the conversation to representation, and Jazz, you talked about it, redistricting, and how it's fascinating to see the rise up of voices with this particular Roe v. Wade, but when it came to Black representation in congressional districts and into voting rights, it was crickets, from everywhere. And do you want to speak to that and why and how and what are your thoughts? What did you think about that?
I try to do my best not to internalize how people show up on the different fights, because everybody's got their issue. I actually, as a matter of fact, encourage people, identify the issue that you want to champion and become a leader there, because we need your voice on so many different things, but identify one thing so that you're not overwhelmed with how you show up. But I will say that just, days prior, we had a governor who completely cut 50% of representation in this state, Black representation in this state in Congress, because he can, and did so legally, despite us having a constitution that said otherwise. And thank God for members like Rep. Rayner and other legislative leaders who hosted a sit-in on the House floor and said, not on their watch, not on their time. This will not happen while they are in leadership. And, white folks, conservatives scattered the room like roaches on the floor of the House, not trying to be associated with what was happening. And I wasn't there, so I don't know all of the specifics, but I know whose faces I did see. And I'm pretty sure some people who are members of the Democratic Party who are going to be vying for our votes in our pulpits soon and at our community barbecues were also members who also scattered on that day as well. I know who I did see in cameras on Tuesday night and Monday night and Wednesday across the state. Everybody from every color. I saw Black male reps standing up there with white women in their signs with their ovaries drawn on butcher paper. And I just thought that was quite interesting to see that no one had to chase them down, work with schedulers, identify if they were available, hear the talking points. You didn't have any of the materials that were required of us as an organization to provide you. You were able to show up and talk immediately about this issue, but we got to pump and prime and massage and hand over. And does this feel right? Does it look right? How does it sound? How are you handling this before we can get you to speak up on a particular issue? So I thank God for Black women once again, because they're the ones who are holding the water on this issue in our state. And it is unfortunate.
I want you to jump in here in a bit, Michele, but I just want to say the silence from allies, Black and white alike, was deafening, right? It was really just fascinating. Even when, for myself, I'm not even in public office and I'm not, in the space of organizing. But when I would try to communicate to people about what's happening, be like, huh? What? And when I would communicate it with them, they're like, it's not a big deal, whatever. And it's like, what? It's like, it's even to some saying, yeah, when Black people get in office, they don't be doing nothing anyway. So they diminished the value of representation. And it was like, it was not a big deal. But you're right. When it came to these issues, everybody had a megaphone. And it was just like, that's fascinating. I was like, okay. And so I just found the response to it very, just peculiar and fascinating.
And I'm going to add this one more thing. Yeah. And then the resources. I saw funders from across the nation rise up, ready to go to support this. we have had to self-fund our fights. Like, figuring out how to get folks to Tallahassee to talk about this issue, how to feed them their meals, and how to make sure that they got back home safely, making sure that our workers' comp policies are up to date and things of that nature. Other people don't have to worry about none of those things because people are coming to their rescue on this single issue.
But it's because white women are centered within the conversation, not Black people.
I mean,
and they control the money that navigates these issues as well.
And boom goes the dynamite. Go ahead, Michele.
I mean, my God, on today, let's just give the Lord a hand clap of praise. I mean, we're here now. So I will tell you, one of my opponents in my race was one of the folks that ran out and didn't stand with us. But the moment I pulled together a rapid response for abortion, can I come in? Didn't say anything. I let him, because guess what? At the end of the day, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than my campaign. The people know what's going on. But no hesitation, no nothing. But when Black folks are literally being under attack, be very clear. And it's not just about, y'all don't have 2 Black members of Congress. Let's talk about what that means.
Right.
That means that we don't not only have representation, that means that resources that should come to our community are not going to be able to come to our community, or it's going to be a lot harder for it to come to our community. That means opportunities that should be coming to our community will not come to our community. That means that the apparatus that we have with regards to voting is already under attack, because if he's gerrymandering this, and we saw what he's doing in SB 90 and Jasmine's organizations, one organizations that have sued him, this is not just about like, y'all just upset because y'all don't have two Black folks. No. It is literally tied to everything that is concerning Black folks in equity. And I'm going to tell you, if we aren't free, ain't nobody free. And so for me, it has been frustrating, because if any of y'all know so Rebecca, you don't know me that well, but Camara and Jasmine know. Y'all know when I fight for everybody. Mm-hmm. I throw my whole heart in it. I throw my whole soul in it, because I understand it through the lens of justice and equity. I just wish that someone would give a shit about us as much as we do for them, especially Black women. Black women will be holding up the signs. We'll be making the signs. We'll be doing all of those things. And it's like, where are y'all in the way? And we show up with our full being, our full self, our full energy. I mean, I did this rally and I flew to New York at 6 a.m. the next morning. I am still tired.
Right.
I'm in call time. Mm-hmm. But where's that energy for us? And so I really do understand where Jazz comes from. And that's why I love her organization. I love organizations like the Collective, because we as Black folks have to make sure that we are putting our money where our mouth is. We are uplifting and amplifying, organizations like Equal Ground and Collective PAC. And then we are getting them the funds they need to do what they need to do. So, I mean, it is very frustrating.
So I'm going to go ahead and, promote Michele real quick. And because no, real talk. I am a very vocal supporter of her campaign, also financial supporter, and she sends me text messages every month, reminding me to continue that support. But I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna say this, man, because when you first announced, and this is before they took away the districts, sorry, the lights went off in my room, motion sensor, but when you first announced. I remember I sent out some text messages to people like, are you going to support, Rep. Rayner? And we're like, who's she running against? And it's like, 2 white men. Right? And I remember to a point, they're like, she's not going to win that. Right? And I was like, well, why not? I mean, just look at the district. And then he gave me all these reasons. And I said, well, damn, shouldn't we just support her because we believe that she'd be the best representative for that district? and not just because we're couching our support based on we think, she can't win because these two white men. But it's really gotten to a deep-seated issue of the normalization of thinking that two white men are in better positions to lead than a black woman. Because why was that? They didn't even talk about, whether they were qualified. It was just, they just looked at, there's two white men. Okay, they got that. And then you think about how, like, we think about leadership, and we think about how we think about women, and think about just anybody in his office. And so when the governor was taking away 2 black seats, it made sense why a lot of people were like, it's not a big deal, because we don't associate power and leadership with us, especially when, 2 of those seats was a black woman. Right. And so, like, I'm very much passionate when I especially when my friends are running and, in offices, and I try to support them financially, because I understand the uphill battle, because we're battling not only the opposition, but we're also battling internally within ourselves, in our own community, about how do we see somebody if they are the right person for the right spot. And there's so much uphill battle that we have to do. So I'm going to tell people, if you listen to this podcast, please donate to Michele Rayner-Goolsby on her march to Congress, because she needs it. And because we need to support people like her. And this ad was paid for by the Michele Rayner-Goolsby
www.michelleforflorida.com. Michele has 1 L. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Kate. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. But so listen,
thank you, friend. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, no. I'm going to write out for you anyway. But I just felt like it needed to be said. And, also we want to support organizations like, Equal Ground, because they are doing the work for, representing us. And they're oftentimes the only person in that space that's doing it. So we want to make sure we support, Jasmine and Equal Ground, and, being the person that's organizing, being the person to get on the bus, to push the bus, to get the bus, to create the bus rides there, right? To create the data, the paperwork. And so, we want to make sure we financially support and even physically support and share their messaging, because, we can't allow them to do the work by themselves and expect the movement. It's a community, it's a community effort, and they can't be the sole representative of that community. And, and obviously, we respect what Rebecca's doing, with her organization and, just Black Health Commission, and how it's important to get the messaging out for, just Black women, or just Black health, period. Because it's not a woman problem, it's a human problem. So this is why I really, really, really wanted to have, you guys on this podcast. And I apologize if I interrupted you guys, because I really, really wanted you guys to be the center of the conversation. I really wanted you guys to have your messaging and your voices heard on this podcast, and just on this platform. So with that being said, I will allow you guys to do your final thoughts, and on anything you can give me your final thoughts, and start with you, Rebecca.
Well, I'm just really grateful that we had this conversation. It was very honest, very open. I appreciate that. There's not that many spaces that we can have this conversation in this manner. Thank you, Camara, for inviting me. And it was really a pleasure being able to, have this conversation with both Rep. Rayner and Jasmine. Again, thank you for that shout out at the end about Black Health Commission too. It's an organization that I started 2 years ago in the peak of the pandemic, realizing that, with the media showcasing, pretty much putting our deaths on display daily, with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I realized that not only do we need to talk about the health disparities in the Black community, but also we need to kind of help shift that focus. We need to stay alive to see our children live. And so that's where the idea of the Black Joy Festival came about. So that's something that we've partnered with Equal Ground before, bringing the community together and having music, the spades table and all of that. We're doing that again for the second time on August 27th. So I just want to do that shameless plug there. But but thank you so much for having me.
Nothing shameless about promoting who you are, what you're about. So, keep keep plugging away. Jazz.
Perfect. So, Camara, thank you for creating this space and this conversation tonight. I really appreciate it. And want to say to my co-panelists, if you will, so great to have this conversation with you all to get the different perspectives. It is, like Rebecca said, rare to be able to do this vulnerably and honest and openly and talk about this. And my hope is that this can be shared far and wide with folks who are grappling with how to show up at this particular time. And it's important because the ruling for this decision actually is not intended to come out until June. So we are going to be feeling the reverberated effects of this for quite some time, even if they choose to come out in June, or if they plan to extend it with an investigation that they're opening. But what people should know is that Florida does have a abortion law on the books that does not go into effect until July. So no matter what the Supreme Court is doing right now, or when they plan to make a decision, as of today, abortions are still legal in this state, and you have until July to access them up to 24 weeks. After that, that time frame does go down a bit in the state.
When does it actually go down?
July 1st.
No. When is it it goes from 24 weeks to what? How many weeks?
15 weeks, I believe.
Okay.
15 weeks is the amount of time that it goes down. And that is based off of a Mississippi case law that actually triggered the Supreme Court conversation or Supreme Court ruling that is coming out. And Rayner may talk about this, but I'll also add that there is a second special session getting ready to come up. One thing that is happening across the state is that legislative bodies who are currently in session are creating trigger laws. So if the Supreme Court does decide to move forward with this particular decision, our state has one final opportunity before we get to the elections to put a trigger law in place that automatically triggers and could potentially stop abortions from happening in the state of Florida. Once the Supreme Court makes their decision, that law automatically goes into effect. So that is a possibility that could be coming our way. But as of right now, it is safe, it is legal, and it is available in the state of Florida until July 1st.
Okay.
Thank you for having me, Camara, and thank you for supporting Equal Ground as well.
No doubt. All right, friend, go ahead and give me your final thoughts.
So Camara, thank you so much for just pulling this together. And also to Jasmine and Rebecca, you are amazing. And thank you for the work that y'all do. It is truly God's work. And I'm just grateful to be able to share virtual space with y'all tonight. And so thank you for just being who you are. And I will tell you, we are in a very scary time. We're in a very dark time. And sometimes it feels like we're not close to the light. Sometimes it feels that we are going to stay in this dark place. But I also, as I've shared earlier during this, I come from the faith background that they tell me that the darkest part of night is right before the light breaks. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping and I'm believing that that's where we're at. I think with leaders like yourself, Camara, but most certainly Jasmine and Rebecca, who are leading the charges in their respective silos and areas, that lets me know that we're a little bit closer to the light. So what I would tell anyone listening to this podcast, one, y'all need to organize like never before, whether it's your work house, your church house, your schoolhouse, whatever that is, organized. Then you need to mobilize. You need to get these feet on the ground. You need to go to neighborhoods. You need to knock doors. Whatever it looks like, whatever mobilization looks like for you, whether it's getting on the bus, coming to Tallahassee, going to DC, whether it's knocking doors, registering folks to vote, you got to mobilize. Number 3, you've got to find a political home, whether it's to Jasmine's point, whether it's an issue that you strongly believe in, whether it's voting rights, whether it's returning citizens, whether it is environmental justice, Black maternal health, find an issue or even find a candidate that you can get behind. And you need to work and find that political home. And then lastly, you have to vote like your life depends on it, because it is very clear. And these people have shown us that our life depends on if we vote or not. So that's all I have.
No, that's dope. That's dope. And usually at the end of every podcast, I do a love letter to Black people. But you know what? We're going to just make sure we keep it on Black women. So we're going to end it on Black women. And, so my love letter to Black women, my love letter to Black people is trust and listen and believe in Black women. So that's my love letter. And so with that being said, we're going to ride out with how we started by listening to Black women. Thank you all for listening to this podcast, and we out.